this war caused a historic shift in public opinion on how Americans view the Middle East conflict. What are we talking about here? Who voters sympathize more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? Back in October of 2023, it was the Israelis by 48 points. Look at this shift. Now we're talking about the Palestinians by a point. I looked back at every single poll that I could possibly find since this question was first asked in the 1980s. This is the first time ever in which the Palestinians had any sort of lead on this particular question. It is very clear that this war caused a historic shift away from the Israeli position in the Middle East conflict and towards the Palestinians when it comes to who Americans and voters sympathize with. This, of course, was led by Democrats, because what are we talking about? We went from Democrats favoring the Israelis by 26 points to the Palestinians by 46 points. That is a shift, John, quick math in my head, of over 70 percentage points. But overall, the first time ever in which more Americans sympathize with the Palestinians over the Israelis. Truly a historic shift.
It's a big shift overall, a big shift within the Democratic Party. What about Republicans?
Yeah, it's not just Democrats, though, in which we have seen a real shift of opinion. Even within the Republican ranks, this war has caused real division. What are we talking about? Well, we often talk about by age within the Democratic Party, but what about by age within the Republican ranks? Who Republicans sympathize more with? You see a massive, huge age divide. Those 50 and over, what we see amongst Republicans is they sympathize more with the Israelis by 66 points. But look at the voters under the age of 50. They do sympathize with the Israelis, but just by 25 points. We're talking about a 40-point difference, with the youngest Republicans being far more sympathetic to the Palestinian position than older Republicans are.
More Americans are beginning to shift their views, with growing support for the Palestinians over Israel. This change has only intensified after the recent death of Charlie Kirk. The pressing question now is, what impact will this shift in public opinion have on U.S. lawmakers and leaders who are seen as heavily influenced by Israel?
These corrupt people that we've elected to office will look at the tide turning against Israel, and they may decide, well, I can't quite do exactly what you want this time. If you want me to vote this way, you're going to have to be more flexible. You're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to do these things, or I will lose what support I have at home. In other words, public opinion does matter. It actually has an impact. So I think he knows that. And right now, it's astonishing to me, and I don't really look at it in depth because it's not an area of expertise for me, but it is astonishing to me to see the numbers of Americans. It doesn't matter whether they're Republicans or Democrats, but the numbers of Americans who apparently believe that the Israelis had a hand in assassinating Charlie Kirk. It's really kind of surprising. It seems to be almost universally acknowledged. I'm not sure that's true. I have no idea. But what's true, it doesn't always matter. It's what people think. So I think if you're Netanyahu right now, and remember, they're paying as much, I think, as $7,000 a pop for going onto social media if you're a so-called influencer and pushing a pro-Israeli narrative. If they're that desperate at this point and they realize public opinion is turning against them, I think I'd want to get this war over with Iran, thinking, of course, that they can win. I'm not sure that's true. In fact, I question it. And I think the Iranians are prepared for that. They've actually said so. If you try to kill the people in charge, you may succeed. If you do, there are more people ready to take over and continue the fight. And then secondly, all the talk about invading northern Iran with a force that would come from Azerbaijan that would try to incite rebellion amongst the Azeri Turks that live inside northern Iran, who happen to be Shiite, has kind of died out. You would think on that basis alone, they would have reconsidered many of their assumptions. But there's probably still some evidence somewhere, I haven't seen it, that the Mossad is active in Azerbaijan and will try to do whatever they can to disrupt and divide the people of Iran. It's just that I don't see much evidence that it has any chance of success. We're interested in controlling the oil and gas in the region. This is a long-term strategic objective. You can go all the way back to the 1990s. We can de facto control the oil and gas resources in the Arab countries. We can do it by buying off the elites, which we have successfully done for years, or we can actually move in with military power and seize them. You can't do that with Iran. You can't do that with Turkey, or Turkey, as they now want to be called. So the only hope of really gaining control of the oil and gas resources to the point where, it's monetarily profitable and the investment pays off, especially if you begin to look at our own weakening financial condition, is for Iran to be knocked out of the equation. It must be balkanized. It must be destroyed, divided, and balkanized. So this is the last shot, and this is what we're prepared to support. The interesting thing, of course, is this also happens against the backdrop of impending conflict or crisis with Venezuela. I think the problem with our assumption, again, all operational planning depends upon assumptions. What are the assumptions that underpin the plan? Strategically, we have a bad habit of making assumptions that are fundamentally false. But by doing so, it allows us to execute the action. The capability to do something is frequently why you do it, not necessarily because you need to. You have the capability on hand. Well, why not? Let's try it and see if it works. A lot of that goes on. I mean, why did we go into Iraq? Why did we go in and stay in Afghanistan? Why did we go after Libya? Why have we gone into Syria? I mean, you start asking these questions. Is there a real need or national security justification for it? I think you can say probably not. But we had the capability to do it, so we did it. And I think with Venezuela, there's a similar set of assumptions that Venezuela internally is very weak, that the population does not support Maduro and his government, that the population could be persuaded either through violence and intimidation or through other kinds of incentives, including monetary ones, that would allow us to easily subvert the regime that is there, remove, either kill or replace Maduro. And then suddenly the skies would open, beautiful flowers would grow, and we would be able to go in and exploit the oil and gas and gold and emeralds and everything else without much interference. I mean, literally, it's a sort of rosy scenario problem. And so just getting rid of 20% of the generals, 4 or 5 years from now, they could all be reconstituted. So what you've got to do is change the structure. But without a new strategy, you don't get a change in the structure. And I remember the Army Chief of Staff, in fact, my classmate at West Point, Ray Odierno, said something I thought was very intelligent and very important. He said, you keep asking us to do more with less. How about asking us to do less with less? And he was right. Everything is overstretched. And now you have the potential for 3 giant military confrontations. One in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine or central Ukraine, whatever it turns out to be. One in the Middle East. It could involve everybody at some point. And now Venezuela, which I think could become the cause célèbre for the Latin American world against us. So it's sheer lunacy. We're not only not shedding unnecessary inventories of old equipment, we're not changing the structure, changing the way we fight. We're not coming to terms with any of those things. We're just spending more money. I think if you look at the 5 points for the foundation of a new national military strategy, I say, first of all, defend America first. It's Western Hemisphere, secure the U.S. borders, coastal waters and airspace. Military power may be used to defend American citizens and identified interests at home and abroad. However, and this is very important, unless the United States' vital strategic interests or its territory are directly attacked, Washington will and should avoid the use of force. Second, you maintain enough strategic power to ensure freedom of action in areas of importance by preserving our core capabilities. That means you identify, defend, and maintain critical lines of communication at a reduced number of overseas bases needed for the execution of these tasks. You declare, and this is extremely important and needs to happen as soon as possible, you declare a no first use doctrine for nuclear weapons. Now, that means you maintain the scientific industrial power to wage high-end conventional warfare. That's what you've seen in eastern Ukraine. That's what the Russians have done. You build nuclear weapons, but you recognize that the alleged advantage of striking first is illusory. You strike first, they return instantly with everything they have. Then establish an operational national defense staff. We have no real general staff system. We don't identify people on the basis of demonstrated character, competence, and intelligence for advancement to high rank, to do the complex planning and staff work that's required. We need a merit-based system. That means people need to be subjected to examinations. They need to prove themselves, their intelligence and ability. And then that chief of defense replaces this thing called the chairman. He's no longer just the senior military advisor to the president. The chief of defense has real authority. And that's very important, because right now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs commands nothing. Then you need to build new armed forces for the 21st century. That's going to take time. Just overhauling the anachronistic World War II structure is not the answer. If you're going to build a new car, you don't bring out the Ford Fairlane 500, give it a new paint job, replace engine parts, put it out there and say, this is the new force. No, you get rid of the Ford Fairlane. You build a new car. What that looks like, if it's a Ferrari or a Porsche, I have no idea. But my point is, you have to go through experimentation. You've got to have an environment in which you have people that are isolated from the rest of the force. They're independently commanded, and they are given technologies that become capabilities, and you employ them, and you learn what they can and cannot do. And you prevent people from stopping change by doing that. You come out with real answers, but that means real experimentation, and that takes time. So all of those things are very important. They all have to happen in the national military strategy. I hope that we get there. It's going to be tough, because you're trying to fight potentially 3 wars at once. Washington hasn't done very well at fighting just one war at once.